They told her to remove her jacket before the verdict, just standard courtroom procedure for a woman facing 10 years in prison. But when Judge Morrison saw the tattoo on her shoulder, his blood ran cold, because that symbol could only be earned in one place, and the woman wearing it was supposed to be dead. From which city around the world are you watching today? If this story moves you, please subscribe to Rising Life Stories to help us share more stories of hidden heroes. The tattoo wasn't just ink on skin. It was a classified military designation that had been erased from all official records. Judge Morrison recognized it immediately because 15 years ago, he'd been the JAG officer who signed the order to eliminate everyone who carried that mark. The woman sitting in his courtroom was supposed to have died in a black ops mission that never officially happened. But Sarah Williams wasn't just alive, she was here, facing charges that could expose the deepest military secrets of the past 2 decades. Sarah Williams sat perfectly still in the defendant's chair at the federal courthouse in Alexandria, Virginia, her hands folded in her lap, her face a mask of calm resignation. At 41, she appeared to be exactly what the prosecution had painted her as, a troubled woman who had made serious mistakes and was now facing the consequences. The courtroom was packed with reporters, federal agents, and curious onlookers drawn by the high-profile nature of the case. Sarah had been accused of selling classified information to foreign operatives, charges that carried a maximum sentence of 10 years in federal prison. The defendant has shown a pattern of deception and betrayal, prosecutor Amanda Richardson had argued during closing statements. Sarah Williams exploited her position as a government contractor to access sensitive materials and sell them to the highest bidder. She is a traitor who deserves the full weight of justice. Sarah's court-appointed attorney, David Chen, had done his best with an impossible case. The evidence against his client was overwhelming. Encrypted communications, financial transactions, classified documents found in her possession. But Sarah had refused to cooperate, refused to explain her actions, and refused to show any remorse. "Your Honor," Chen had pleaded, "my client may have made mistakes, but she is not the hardened criminal the prosecution portrays. She's a single mother trying to provide for her family. I ask for leniency." Throughout the trial, Sarah had remained an enigma. She dressed simply, dark slacks, white blouses, conservative blazers that covered her arms completely. She spoke only when directly addressed by the judge, her voice quiet but steady. The media had dubbed her the Ice Queen for her apparent lack of emotion. What no one in that courtroom knew was that Sarah Williams wasn't even her real name. The woman sitting in the defendant's chair had died officially 15 years ago in a classified operation that had been scrubbed from all records. The person who lived on was someone else entirely, someone who had spent a decade and a half building a new identity, a new life, and trying to forget the things she'd done in service to her country. Judge Robert Morrison presided over the case with his usual stern efficiency. At 58, he was known for running a tight courtroom and handing down fair but firm sentences. His military background, 20 years as a JAG officer before joining the federal bench, gave him particular insight into cases involving national security. But as Judge Morrison looked down at the defendant, something nagged at him. There was something familiar about Sarah Williams, something he couldn't quite place. The way she held herself, the alertness in her eyes despite her calm demeanor, it reminded him of someone, but the memory remained frustratingly out of reach. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Morrison asked, his voice echoing through the packed courtroom. The foreman, a middle-aged accountant named Thomas Bradley, stood slowly. "We have, Your Honor." Sarah Williams remained motionless as the verdict was read, guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted in whispers and camera clicks, but Sarah's expression never changed. She had expected this outcome from the moment she'd been arrested 6 months ago. "The court will now proceed to sentencing," Judge Morrison announced. "Bailiff, please prepare the defendant for processing." This was standard procedure in federal court. Before sentencing, defendants were required to remove any outer garments, jewelry, or accessories that might interfere with the court's security protocols. It was a routine formality that few people paid attention to. Bailiff Marcus Johnson approached Sarah's table. "Ma'am, I need you to remove your jacket and place it on the chair behind you." Sarah hesitated for just a moment. For 15 years, she had been careful never to expose her shoulders in public. The blazer wasn't just clothing. It was armor, protection against recognition, against questions she couldn't answer. "Ma'am?" the bailiff prompted gently. Sarah stood slowly and began to unbutton her navy blue blazer. The courtroom continued its post-verdict buzz, with reporters typing furiously and spectators discussing the outcome in hushed tones. No one was paying particular attention to the routine preparation for sentencing. But as Sarah slipped the jacket off her shoulders, Judge Morrison's gaze fell on her left shoulder blade, visible through the thin fabric of her white blouse. At first, he thought it was a shadow, a trick of the courtroom lighting. Then his eyes focused, and his blood turned to ice. There, clearly visible through the translucent fabric, was a tattoo that Judge Morrison recognized with absolute certainty. It wasn't decorative artwork or a personal statement. It was a small, precise symbol that had been burned into his memory 15 years ago. A black dagger piercing a skull, with the Roman numeral 13 below it. Judge Morrison's hands began to shake almost imperceptibly. His mind raced back to a classified briefing room in the Pentagon, to a file marked with the highest security clearances, to an operation so secret that only a handful of people had ever known it existed. Operation Lazarus, Unit 13, the dagger and skull. Sarah Williams, or whoever she really was, carried the mark of the most classified special operations unit in American military history, a unit that had been disbanded and eliminated 15 years ago, a unit whose members had all been declared killed in action to protect national security. The judge's mouth went dry as fragments of memory crashed together. The briefing, the files, the order he had signed as a young JAG officer, authorizing the termination of Operation Lazarus to prevent a massive intelligence leak. Judge Morrison stared at the tattoo for what felt like an eternity but was probably only seconds. The courtroom continued its routine business around him, but everything had changed. The woman standing before him wasn't just Sarah Williams, government contractor and convicted traitor. She was something far more dangerous and far more valuable. "Your Honor," Bailiff Johnson's voice seemed to come from far away. "Are you ready to proceed with sentencing?" Judge Morrison blinked, forcing himself back to the present. Yes, of course." But his voice carried a tremor that hadn't been there moments before. He looked at Sarah Williams, or whoever she really was, and saw that she was watching him carefully. Her eyes met his, and for just an instant, he saw something flicker in her expression. Recognition. She knew that he knew. "Ladies and gentlemen," Judge Morrison said, his voice stronger now, "I need to call a brief recess to review some procedural matters. Court will reconvene in 30 minutes. The announcement caused a stir in the courtroom. It was unusual for a judge to call a recess immediately before sentencing, especially in such a straightforward case, but Judge Morrison was already rising from the bench, his mind racing through the implications of what he'd just discovered. As the courtroom emptied, Sarah put her jacket back on with deliberate care. She had seen the moment of recognition in the judge's eyes, had watched his face change from routine authority to shocked understanding. After 15 years of hiding, her past had finally caught up with her. In his chambers, Judge Morrison sat heavily in his leather chair and tried to process what he'd just seen. Operation Lazarus had been the military's deepest black project, a unit of 12 operatives tasked with missions so classified that they had operated without official oversight or acknowledgement. He remembered the briefing from Colonel Patricia Hayes, the Pentagon liaison who had explained the situation to a small group of JAG officers. "These operatives have knowledge that could compromise national security if it ever became public," she had said. "The unit must be disbanded, and all traces of its existence must be eliminated." Morrison had been young then, ambitious, eager to prove himself in high-level military law. When presented with the termination orders, he had signed them without fully understanding their implications. Operation Lazarus would be erased, its members would be declared KIA in unrelated incidents. The unit would cease to exist. But now one of them was sitting in his courtroom, very much alive, facing charges for selling classified information. The irony was staggering. The government was prosecuting someone for espionage when she had once been one of its most secret weapons. Judge Morrison picked up his secure phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in 15 years. Colonel Hayes, now a general, answered on the second ring. "General Hayes, this is Judge Robert Morrison. We need to talk. It's about Operation Lazarus." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. "Judge Morrison," General Hayes finally said, her voice carefully controlled, "that operation was classified beyond your current clearance level. I'm not sure what you think you remember, but—" "She's here," Morrison interrupted. "In my courtroom, Unit 13. I can see the tattoo." Another long silence. Then, "Judge Morrison, I'll be there in 2 hours. Do not proceed with sentencing. Do not let her leave federal custody, and do not discuss this with anyone else." The line went dead. As Judge Morrison waited for General Hayes to arrive, his mind drifted back to what he remembered about Operation Lazarus. It had been the Pentagon's response to a new kind of warfare, operations that required complete deniability, missions that couldn't exist on any official record. Unit 13 had been the crown jewel of the program. 12 operatives, each with specialized skills, capable of undertaking assignments that conventional military units couldn't touch. They had operated in the shadows for 3 years, until everything went wrong. The details were still classified, but Morrison remembered the broad strokes. A mission in Eastern Europe had been compromised. Intelligence suggested that someone within Unit 13 was feeding information to foreign powers. Rather than risk exposure of the entire program, the Pentagon had made a brutal calculation: eliminate the unit entirely. The official story was that all 12 members of Unit 13 had been killed in a helicopter crash during a training exercise. There had been a memorial service, closed caskets, grieving families who were told their loved ones had died serving their country. But Morrison now knew the truth was more complex. At least one member of Unit 13 had survived the program's termination. Sarah Williams, or whatever her real name was, had somehow escaped the purge and built a new life. But her expertise and knowledge had made her a target, and now she was facing charges that could expose everything the military had tried to bury. When General Hayes arrived at the courthouse, she was accompanied by 2 men in dark suits who were obviously federal agents. They met in Judge Morrison's chambers, far from the curious eyes of reporters and court personnel. "Judge Morrison," General Hayes said without preamble, "what you saw today cannot leave this room. The implications go far beyond a simple espionage case." "Who is she?" Morrison asked. "What's her real name?" General Hayes hesitated. "Her name was Captain Elena Vasquez. She was Unit 13's intelligence specialist. We thought she died with the rest of her team 15 years ago. But she didn't. Obviously not. The question now is what we do about it." 2 hours later, court reconvened under extraordinary circumstances. The public and press had been cleared from the courtroom under the pretense of national security concerns. Only essential personnel remained: Judge Morrison, the prosecution team, defense attorney Chen, and several federal agents. Sarah Williams sat in the defendant's chair, her jacket still covering the tattoo that had changed everything. She looked calm, but Morrison could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes tracked every movement in the room. "Ms. Williams," Judge Morrison began, "or should I say Captain Vasquez?" The use of her real name caused the slightest reaction, a quick intake of breath, a momentary tightening around her eyes, but she said nothing. "Captain Elena Vasquez, United States Army, formerly of a classified Special Operations Unit," Morrison continued. "Unit 13 of Operation Lazarus, a unit that was officially disbanded 15 years ago." Defense attorney Chen looked confused and alarmed. This was clearly the first he was hearing of his client's military background. "Your Honor, I object to this line of questioning. My client's alleged military service has no bearing on the current charges." "Mr. Chen," Morrison replied, "your client's military service has everything to do with these charges. Captain Vasquez, you're accused of selling classified information. But the question we need to answer is, what information and to whom?" For the first time during the entire trial, Sarah Williams, Elena Vasquez, spoke without being directly questioned. "I didn't sell anything," she said quietly. "I was trying to buy it back." The statement sent a shock through the courtroom. General Hayes leaned forward in her observer's seat. "Buy what back?" Morrison asked. Elena looked directly at General Hayes. "The files on Operation Lazarus. Someone has been selling information about the unit, about the missions we ran, about what really happened to my team. I've been tracking the leak for 3 years. You're saying you were conducting your own investigation? I'm saying that someone in the Pentagon has been monetizing the deaths of my teammates, and I was trying to stop them. The revelation changed everything. Elena Vasquez wasn't a traitor selling secrets. She was a survivor trying to protect the memory of her fallen unit. The evidence that had seemed so damning took on new meaning when viewed through the lens of someone trying to trace a leak rather than create one. Over the following weeks, Elena's story was verified through classified channels. Her unit had been betrayed during their final mission, but she had escaped and spent 15 years in hiding, building a new identity while secretly tracking down those responsible for her team's death. The charges against her were quietly dropped. The real traitor, a Pentagon official who had been selling Operation Lazarus intel, was arrested and convicted. Elena was offered reinstatement and recognition for her service, but she declined. "I've been dead for 15 years, she told Judge Morrison in their final meeting. "I'd like to stay that way." Judge Morrison sealed the records, and Elena Vasquez disappeared once again, this time with the government's blessing. Her tattoo had revealed not just her identity, but her integrity. At Rising Life Stories, we believe that heroes sometimes emerge from the shadows when justice demands it. Sometimes a single moment of recognition can change everything, and sometimes the people we judge are the ones who deserve our gratitude. Where in the world are you watching today? If this story moved you, please subscribe and share, because there are heroes hiding in plain sight, carrying their service and sacrifice in ways we may never fully understand.